Everyone knows why Paul McCartney bought an Aston Martin DB5. He'd seen the Bond film, same car, same year, obvious. Except he ordered his months before Goldfinger opened, before the poster, before the trailer, before anybody outside a film set knew what a DB5 was. He didn't copy Bond, he got there first, and nobody has believed him since. He'd ordered it while banned from driving. He specified a record player in it, and he wore it out. 40,000 miles of London, at the height of Beatle mania. That car still exists, sort of, because somebody decided the world would rather have Bond's car than Paul's, and painted over him to get it. Start with what he was driving before, because it tells you everything about the distance he'd traveled. A Ford Consul, a perfectly decent, perfectly ordinary British family saloon, the sort of car a young man from Liverpool with a bit of money coming in might reasonably buy. Nothing wrong with it. Nothing remarkable about it either. That's the launch pad. Ford Consul to Aston Martin DB5. In the history of British car upgrades, there is barely a bigger leap available. And here's the first thing about this story that doesn't behave itself. When McCartney ordered the most desirable car in the country, he wasn't allowed to drive. He was serving a driving ban. It ended that summer, but at the moment he chose the car, the color, the options. He was, legally, a pedestrian. Picture that for a second. 22 years old, the most famous band on earth. Money arriving faster than anyone around him can count it. Banned from the road. And what does he do? He orders a 4-liter Aston Martin. Not the behavior of a sensible man. The behavior of a man who's just realized the rules he grew up with no longer apply to him. And what he ordered was very specific. The paperwork survives, which is why we can be precise about this rather than romantic. The car was completed at Newport Pagnell, Aston Martin's home, where the cars were built largely by hand, on the 3rd of July, 1964. He'd placed the order in the summer, before the Beatles left for their world tour. The bill came to £3,800 and 10 shillings, plus another £793 of purchase tax. Round it up, and you're looking at roughly £4,500. In 1964, when the average British house cost around £3,000, he bought a car worth more than a house. At 22. But it's the specification that matters, because this is where the story stops being about money and starts being about a person. He didn't order it in silver. He didn't order it in the color you're picturing right now. He ordered it in Sierra blue, with a black leather interior. Hold on to that. Blue and black. Write it down somewhere, because by the end of this story, it's going to matter more than anything else here. He also ticked some boxes on the options list. Uprated rear shock absorbers, the adjustable kind, for a man who intended to actually drive the thing. A Motorola radio. And one more thing. A thing so odd, so specific, so completely him, that it explains the entire man in a single line item. He ordered a record player. In the car, a Philips Auto-Mignon, a small unit that sat in the cabin, took a single 7-inch single and played it while you drove. Think about what that involves. This is 1964, live rear axle, terrible British roads. You are asking a needle to sit in a groove a fraction of a millimeter wide while the machine crashes over potholes at speed. An absurd idea, the engineering equivalent of eating soup on a roller coaster. He didn't care. He wanted music in the car. And that tells you something about Paul McCartney in 1964 that no biography quite captures. This is a man who could not tolerate being in a moving vehicle without music playing, not as decoration, as oxygen. He was, at that exact moment, one half of the most productive songwriting partnership in the history of popular music. And his brain apparently did not switch off when he got behind the wheel. The stitching in that black leather is supposed to have carried a pattern, reportedly, musical notes, worked into the hide. I say reportedly because the sources hedge on it, and I'm not going to state as fact, something I can't stand behind. But it's a persistent detail, and when the car was eventually sold, a sample of that original material went with it. Blue paint, black leather with notes in it. A record player in the dashboard. This wasn't a rich man's trophy. This was a workspace. And then, while it was being built, something happened in a cinema in Leicester Square that would swallow the car whole. On the 17th of September 1964, Goldfinger had its world premiere. Sean Connery drove an Aston Martin DB5 through it. Ejector seat, revolving plates, machine guns behind the indicators, and in roughly 2 hours, an obscure hand-built British Grand Tourer became the most famous car on the planet. It has never stopped being famous since. 60 years later, the DB5 is still what people mean when they say the words James Bond car. Paul McCartney's DB5 was delivered 5 days later. 5 days. He took delivery on the 22nd of September to his accountant's office, less than a week after the film that made the car iconic reached the public. Now, this is the part everyone gets wrong, and it's the reason this video exists. That timing looks damning. It looks like a young pop star saw the film and went straight out and bought the car. It's the obvious conclusion, and everybody has quietly drawn it for 60 years. It's not what happened. It can't be what happened. The car was finished in July. It was ordered before that, in the summer, before the world tour. The order, the specification, the color, the record player, all of it was locked in months before a single member of the public had seen Goldfinger. He wasn't following Bond. He simply had, at 22, exactly the same taste as the people making the most successful film franchise in history, and he had it first. But nobody was ever going to believe that. Not with a delivery date 5 days after the premiere. From that moment on, his car was Bond's car, whether he liked it or not. The difference is, he actually used his. Here's where the story separates from every other celebrity car story you've heard. He drove it. Constantly. Brutally. Everywhere. By 1970, when the car went in for a new clutch, the odometer read 40,513 miles. Sit with that number, because it's the most impressive fact in this entire story. 40,000 miles, in 6 years, through the exact period when Paul McCartney was arguably the busiest human being in Britain. Rubber Soul, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, Abbey Road, world tours, films, the most intense creative run any band has ever had. And in the middle of all of it, he's putting 7,000 miles a year on an Aston Martin. The press caught him at it constantly. In 1967, Time magazine profiled him and, among notes about his film habit and his girlfriend Jane Asher, described him tooling around town in, their words, a spiffy blue Aston Martin DB5. Blue. In print, in America's biggest magazine. And there's a lovely, human piece of testimony from the other side of it. Roger McGuinn, guitarist of the Byrds, was over from California in the mid-60s. The Beatles came to a Byrds show. Afterwards, the two bands went out. And the following night, McGuinn found himself at McCartney's club in St. James's, and Paul took him out for a drive around London in the Aston. McGuinn remembered it decades later, still slightly amazed, as a really amazing time. That's what this car was. Not a garage ornament. A blue Aston Martin, full of records, being driven round London at night by a Beatle showing off to a mate. And the habit he built in that car would end up producing one of the most famous songs ever written. Let me be precise here, because this is where lesser tellings of this story cheat. The record player in the DB5 taught Paul McCartney something. It taught him that a car is a place where music happens, that the drive is not dead time between two places. It's a room, moving, with him alone in it. So when he replaced the DB5's stablemate with a DB6, a green one, he didn't order a record player. He'd learned something. He ordered a tape recorder, a reel-to-reel machine, in the car so that he could capture rather than just listen. And in 1968, driving out to visit John Lennon's young son Julian, a song arrived in his head. He got it down on the tape, in the car. It was called Hey Jules. You know it as Hey Jude. Lennon later called it Paul's best song. Now, Hey Jude was written in the DB6. Not the DB5. I'm telling you that plainly because you'd find out, and because the honest version is better anyway. The DB5 is where the habit started. It's the car that first put music inside the machine, and taught a 22-year-old that he could work at the wheel. The DB6 just caught what the DB5 had trained him to do. The blue car started it. and 2 years after Hey Jude, the blue car was gone. In 1970, Paul McCartney sold the Aston Martin. The timing is not subtle. 1970 is the year the Beatles ended, the year of the lawsuits, the split, the end of everything he'd been since he was a teenager. And in that same year, the car he'd bought at the very beginning of it all, the car he'd worn out across 40,000 miles of that life, went out of the door. And here's what happened to it, which is one of the strangest sentences in British motoring. The Beatles' Aston Martin was sold to a stationery shop, a firm called Truebell Stationers, in Wandsworth, southwest London. Paper and pens and envelopes. That's the next owner of Paul McCartney's DB5. No drama, no auction, no fanfare, no sense anyone understood they were handling an artifact. Just a used 6-year-old Aston with 40,000 miles on it. In a city that hadn't yet worked out, this stuff would be worth fortunes. The car simply walked out of history's line of sight. And it stayed out for a very long time. For the next few decades, it was just a car. In 1983, 13 years after McCartney let it go, a man in Ilford bought it and kept it 13 more before selling on in 1996. It changed hands again. It aged. The original interior was replaced, because that's what happens to interiors. Then, in 2002, a British collector bought it and recognized what he had. He sent it to a specialist in Milan for a full bare metal restoration and, this matters, had it repainted in its own original color, Sierra blue. He put it back the way Paul had ordered it, and then it was bought by the broadcaster Chris Evans, a serious car enthusiast, who did something clever. He went out and acquired a registration plate for it. 64 Mac, 64 for the year, Mac for Macca. It's perfect. It's so perfect that today, almost everyone who sees that car assumes McCartney chose it himself. He didn't. That plate has nothing to do with Paul McCartney. It was bolted on decades later by a later owner who understood, correctly, that the story was now worth more than the car, which turned out to be the whole problem. In 2012, the DB5 came up at auction in London, still wearing its true colors, Sierra blue, exactly as ordered in 1964. It sold for £344,000. For a genuine, documented, first owned by a Beatle DB5, that is not a lot of money. And the new owner clearly agreed, because what happened next took 4 years, and it deleted Paul McCartney from his own car. They restored it to Consul's standard, which is to say, obsessively. And in the process, they made 3 decisions. They took the engine, his engine, the original one, and bored it out. 4 liters became 4.2. 280 horsepower became 315. Faster than he ever drove it. They fitted a red leather interior, not black, red, and they painted it silver. Silver birch, to be exact. The precise, specific shade of James Bond's DB5 in Goldfinger. Read that again. They took the one DB5 on Earth that was demonstrably not a Bond tribute, the one ordered before the film, in a color Bond never used, by a man who got there first, and they painted it to look like the film car. The single fact that made this car unique, they removed with a spray gun. And then, having erased him, they stitched his name into the back seat. A little inscription, commemorating that it was once Paul McCartney's. The same words repeated inside the glove compartment. They deleted the man and left a label where he'd been. In December 2017, the silver car went to Bonhams and sold for £1,345,000. Sounds like a triumph. It isn't, because at that time, an excellent DB5 with no famous owner at all was worth around $1.4 million anyway. Being Paul McCartney's first Aston Martin, documented, matching numbers, 40,000 miles of Beatlemania in the seats, added astonishingly little. And here's the number that finishes the argument. 2 years later, one of the actual Bond film cars sold for close to $6.5 million. 4 times more, for a car that pretended, with props and gadgets, to be something in a movie. The real one, owned by a real genius, driven to real places, was worth a quarter of the fake. So the man who owned Paul's car did the rational thing. He made it look like the fake. You cannot even call it vandalism. The market asked for it. In the record is a blue car, black leather, a record player in the dash, 40,000 miles of London at night, a Beatle at the wheel, music over potholes. It isn't anywhere now. We painted over him because we preferred the film. Baby, you could have driven his car.